Hello and welcome. You're watching the Tov Jewish News Channel. My name is Michael Vילנסקי and my guest today is Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, president of the Israel 365 Action site. Pesach, great to have you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Pesach, you're a person that is very knowledgeable in the field of Jewish-Christian ties. And I want to ask you that why in the wake of the Gaza war should Christians be pro-Israel? Can you please explain that to us?
Well, there's a number of reasons why Christians today are pro-Israel and why especially the Gaza war is a spark to make them even more active on our behalf. First, we have to understand that Christians today, and I'm going to speak now for the most part about Protestants, most of the Christian support for Israel, almost all of it comes from the Protestant world, from the evangelical world, who are almost all Protestants. And their theology, the theology of modern Protestantism and what's called spirit-filled Christianity, which is the dominant growing Christianity in America, what's known as evangelical Christianity, they look at the Bible, at the Tanakh, as the Word of God and as prophetic Word of God that is speaking about what is supposed to happen in the world. And when the state of Israel was founded, and the Jewish people started coming back in great numbers, and especially over the last few decades, when the state of Israel has become an economic success story and more Jews have been moving to Israel, Christians look at that and they see a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. They see that the promises that were made in the Tanakh, starting all the way back with Avram Avinu, but especially what you see in Dvarim, in Deuteronomy chapter 30, even if you are scattered to the ends of the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you back, and you will take possession of the land of your forefathers, and you will become more numerous and more prosperous than your ancestors. That's what it says there in Sefer Dvarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, that after a long exile, the Jewish people will come back to the land of Israel and will take possession of it and become a successful economic country. That's right there in the Torah. And Christians see that, and they see what's going on in Israel today. They see that the Jewish people were in a long exile and that we've come home. And they see this as a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. And therefore, that's the main driving force behind their support. Now, with October 7th, we have another added element, which is that the attacks against the Jewish people, which were so reminiscent of the Holocaust, of attacks for being Jews, of atrocities against the Jews, that also stirs something very powerful, because another detail or another aspect of the Christian support for Israel that has been growing for the last 40 years or so is a growing awareness by Christians for Christian guilt that has to do with the Holocaust and the persecution of Jews in Europe, especially, but throughout Christian countries over the centuries. And Christians today are learning more about that. Jews know a lot about the persecution of Jews. Most Christians are not taught about that, but now more and more Christians, especially Christians who are supportive of Israel, are very sensitive to anti-Semitism. So when Jews are under attack for being Jews in the land of Israel, that very much awakens within Christians a sense of responsibility.
Pesach, me personally, I don't think that Christians are responsible for the Holocaust, because the Holocaust was done by a dictator which was atheist, with even some pagan undertones, as you probably know. So I don't think it's it's a Christian problem, right?
Oh, I don't think so either. I'm just telling you how Christians view it. They understand that a lot of the anti-Semitism in Europe throughout the centuries was really from Christianity. They know more about that, was my point.
Right, but still, the relations between Judaism and Christianity are not the simplest ones, let's put it this way. That because throughout history, Christians weren't usually, very supportive of Judaism. And my question to you is, why did that change? Why did Christians suddenly become pro-Israel? And is that something stable? Is that something that will stay with us in the future?
That's a great question, and it's a bit of a complicated question. I'll try to simplify it. From a couple of centuries after the beginning of Christianity, there entered into Christianity an idea a philosophical or theological idea, which is not in the Christian Bible, what's called the New Testament. It's not in their biblical writings, but it comes, like I said, a couple centuries after, which is usually known as supersessionism or replacement theology. Now, what replacement theology is, and this was the standard belief of almost all Christians until recently, is that the Christian church replaced the people of Israel, that the church is the new Israel, that all of the blessings that are promised to the nation of Israel, to the Jewish people in the Bible, the Jewish people lost that covenant, they lost those blessings, and that all those blessings are transferred over to the Christian church. And this was invented, like I said, a couple centuries after Christianity began. It became the popular way of thinking. And one of the core ideas in replacement theology that was put forward by Augustine. Augustine is the most influential and well-known Christian thinker. He's kind of like, for Christians, what Rambam is for Jews, a very influential thinker from the Middle Ages or earlier. And Augustine explained it and said, well, because the Jews rejected Jesus, they are destined to remain in exile forever as a punishment and as a testimony, as a witness to what happens when you reject Jesus. Now, there were always some parts of Christianity, a minority that didn't believe that. And what happened was, in recent years, ever since a few hundred years ago, when Protestant Christians, especially in England and in America, started really just reading the Bible and not paying attention to these traditions, they started to question this theology. But more importantly, as I said previously, when the state of Israel was declared, this made a very big change. Because the state of Israel was declared and the Jews took possession of our land and started returning en masse to our land, that showed that Augustine's theology was wrong. And it caused a lot of Christians to say, wait a second, replacement theology can't be true if God is fulfilling his promises to the Jewish people. So we're at a point right now that, according to one Christian scholar today, Kendall Sulin, who's one of the most prominent Christian theologians in America, he's a professor at Emory University, according to Kendall Sulin's latest book, he says that the majority of Christians today are part of branches of Christianity that do not believe in replacement theology. So the state of Israel has really caused a great shifting of thinking in the Christian world, even about the relationship of Christianity and Judaism.
So Pesach, I want us to look at the situation in the Christian world across the board. Look at the three main Christian denominations: the Orthodox, the Catholic, and the Protestants. And I want to ask you, which one of these three denominations is the most pro-Israel, and really, how do these three denominations classify in their support for Israel?
Oh, okay. So let's start with the idea of Protestant denomination. Protestantism is really the break from the Catholic Church and certainly from the Orthodox Church. But there isn't one Protestant denomination. Very important to understand. And this is going to sound a little crazy to Jews because we're so small. But this is no exaggeration. There are more than 30,000 different denominations within Protestantism. I know that sounds a little crazy, but what Protestant denominations, there's a lot of different Protestant denominations. You have Lutherans and Methodists and Episcopalians, and you have Pentecostals and Baptists, and there's many, many different denominations of Protestantism, and they don't all think the same way about Israel. Some of those denominations are very anti-Israel. But when you ask about who the most pro-Israel denominations in Christianity are, it's what we would call the Pentecostals, who are a lot of the evangelicals. A huge percentage of the evangelical Christians in America are Pentecostals, and they tend to be the most pro-Israel of all the denominations. And the question you might ask why that is, well, they don't feel as strongly about inherited traditions of interpretation. So the big challenge that we have with Christians being more pro-Israel is this theology of replacement that I talked about, that is an inherited theology that was believed for Christians for so many centuries. And just like in Judaism, like in any religious system, when there's a belief system that's been brought down through centuries and centuries of belief, people give it a certain authority, and they have a hard time walking away from it. But the whole Pentecostal approach to their theology is much more open to, to God changing things and God revealing himself. And the way they think about the world, they're much more tied to the words of the Bible and less to inherited traditions. And that opens them up to a more open-minded way of viewing what's happening in the world today and seeing the state of Israel as the fulfillment of prophecy. The Catholics also, at a doctrinal level, in terms of their recent writings coming out of the Catholic Church, have walked away from replacement theology and have become more favorable to Israel. But the Catholic Church has a problem, which is that there's a lot of Catholics in parts of the world that are very anti-Israel. In the Arab world, there's still a lot of Catholics who are persecuted and have a difficult time. And if the Catholic Church is too pro-Israel, they could endanger the Catholics living in Arab countries that are anti-Israel. So they have to be very careful about how they message on Israel. It's very complex, the Christian world, because, we're concerned about who our friends are and who our enemies are. It's a very complex situation. One of the big challenges we have now is that younger Christians are more inclined to listen to mainstream media narratives and don't know the history. So a lot of them buy into the quote unquote Palestinian narrative. And these are the battles we're fighting. This is the work that I'm engaged in every day.
So, Pesach, it is a nice segue into my next question. I want to ask you about the future of Christian support for Israel. I'm talking to many volunteers that in Israel that volunteer with the Christians from the U.S., and they say that right now the age of the mean age of volunteers is growing, right? Because the younger generation doesn't really want to volunteer for Israel. So it might indicate a decline in Christian support for Israel. Do you think that is the case? And if so, what is the future of Christian support for Israel?
Yeah, I think that is the case. The statistics show that it is the case. And I think that part of it could be, if I want to be optimistic, I'll say that a lot of people get more politically engaged as they get older. But I think that that's not all exactly correct. I think that the younger Christians, like I said, are more influenced by mainstream media narratives. But there are organizations that are working very hard on it, bringing groups of Christian students to Israel. In my own personal work, what I've been focused on is getting engaged with Christian colleges. And I don't mean non-Jewish colleges that have Christian students. I mean Christian schools that are training Christian leaders, the seminaries, which is kind of like for Jews, like the programs that train rabbis. And I've been engaged in trying to become more of a presence on those campuses and get to know their professors who are teaching them and bring their professors to Israel and really start to engage the younger generation more. And at Israel 365 Action, we've been bringing groups of young Christian leaders to Israel to go back and create and work on creating more pro-Israel Christian communities. What does the future look like? It's hard to say because it's not as simple. A lot of Jews think, oh, the Christians love us, the Christians are pro-Israel. It's not true. As you pointed out, the supporters of Israel in the Christian world are an aging population. We need the younger Christians to be on board. I think that one thing that could turn it around is if the messaging out of Israel would be more geared towards what their concerns are. Because young Christians, even if they're not so sure about Israel because they don't know, they do know that the Christian culture of the Western world and of the United States of America is under attack. And it's under attack by the leftists, it's under attack by secularism, and it's also under attack by Islam globally. And if we could make it clear that we're fighting the same battles as them, that we share the same values as them, and that we're on the same team in the global fight against the forces of evil that hate them as much as they hate the Jews, meaning like Hamas, ISIS, these organizations, they want to kill Christians, and they do kill Christians in Nigeria and elsewhere, just like Hamas kills Jews in Israel. If we could make that case more clearly, that we're fighting the same fight as them, I think we could increase support for Israel among younger Christians.
Rabbi Pesach Wolicki, thank you very much for this interview and for your insight on the relations between Christianity and Judaism.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Thank you also to all of our viewers that saw this interview. Please don't forget to subscribe to us on all of our social media platforms. Thank you again, and have a great day.